Far beneath the Sinnoh regions, there lies a vast area of tunnels. If you're a resident of the region, chances are you've already heard the stories. Most people know it as a place of entertainment and adventure, a place where you can experience your very own treasure hunt. Because of this, the darkest secret of the tunnels are overlooked, and sometimes even forgotten by everyone not personally affected by it. See, throughout the years, many people have disappeared down there. Some have been lucky enough to make it out eventually, but the majority have remained lost to the world above. And if you happen to have been down in the tunnels at some point, the thought of people becoming lost in there doesn't seem so far-fetched. Everything looks almost identical down there, and there's no way of knowing which way you've already walked once you start to advance deeper and deeper. Unless you're a fast thinker and put on a trail to avoid getting lost. However, many people who venture down here think high enough of themselves that they become invincible in their own eyes. Surely they, a hiker with more than 30 years experience, for example, wouldn't bow down to some winding underground tunnels. No, that's just ridiculous. But while confidence is a virtue in many situations, it seems to make these people more foolish once they're down in the tunnels. Children and grown-ups alike run around giddily in search of spheres, heart scales, and if they're lucky, even a fossil or two. It makes them lose track of time and thus eventually lose track of their surroundings, and before you know it, they're lost. Now fortunately for some, using their Explorer kit makes them able to return to the outside world about the cold, dark earth they were trapped beneath just moments before. The worry of becoming one of the lost ones will slowly wear off once the person is able to breathe the fresh air above ground, and they'll forget about it and move on to their homes or the journey they've embarked on. They'll forget about the ordeal that they could easily have had a tragic end to, and they'll move on. One boy deciding to make his way into the underground was just as confident in himself as the people mentioned earlier. Ever since he left home to experience his very own adventure, which was a little more than 3 weeks ago, he'd heard the stories of the underground, of the treasures, and of course, the lost ones. The stories and rumors had come into existence even before he was born, and it was something his grandfather enjoyed telling him about in the evenings, much to the discontent of the boy's mother. His grandfather spoke of how he'd ventured into the tunnels on several occasions in his youth, when he was around the same age as the boy himself. He talked about how he and his loyal Pokémon had unearthed some bones once, and how much it had startled him. And about all of the different traps they'd rigged into the ground. But they were all just for laughs, the boy's grandfather reassured. Most of those traps were completely harmless. After all, the intention was not to hurt the other travelers down there, simply give them a bit of a startle and a challenge. The boy took his grandfather's stories with him on his journey, storing the old man's advices in the safety of his mind. He received his starter Pokémon, a bouncy Chimchar, and caught a lot of others before he came to the point of his journey that his grandfather told him so much about. Before he'd met and battled in or around the Lost Tower, he'd constantly reminded him that if he had entered the underground, he would do so at his own risk. And how silly they were. The boy wasn't afraid of some underground tunnels. His biggest concern about venturing down there was if his bag would be able to hold all the treasure he'd find, or if his favorite sneakers would get ruined by all the dirt and dust. With confidence, he retrieved his Explorer kit, called back his trusted Chimchar to its Pokeball, and headed down into the depths. His worries had been legitimate after all. His meager backpack hadn't been nearly enough to contain all the different sized spheres that he'd dug out during the time he'd spent underground. Not only had he gotten enough spheres to last him a lifetime, but he'd also, to his great delight, found some fossils. Perhaps they'd be of some use. Satisfied with his findings, he walked around the tunnels a bit more before deciding to return to the surface, and it was like a wholly different world down there where no natural light existed, the only sources of light being the many bulbs in the ceiling, and the light his Chimchar had given off whenever they'd reach an area where there were no light bulbs. This boy sighed, recalling his Pokémon and taking out his Explorer kit for a trip to the world above ground. He'd miss this place, but he'd set his goals in the Pokémon League and he couldn't stay down treasure hunting forever now, could he? Making sure to pick a good spot to go up from, he wouldn't want to go up only to hit his head on a rock or get stuck in some bushes. The boy only took a few more steps until he found the spot that felt just right. He pressed the button and nothing. Nothing happened at first, but that only lasted for a few milliseconds before he felt the ground disappearing from under his feet, and he fell for what felt like ages. The fall wasn't that long, naturally, but when things happen too fast for the brain to react, the moment seems to somehow slow down, however crazy that might sound. Soon, Our young adventurer found himself trapped in the ground, squeezed into a hole that was so narrow it made breathing difficult. His backpack with all of its contents didn't really make things easier either, as they pressed him further into the dirt wall. A few hacking coughs later, the boy tried to survey his surroundings and ponder his next move, which didn't come easy either, since he was constantly distracted by small particles of dirt getting into his eyes. He'd encountered a few traps before, but none of the fall traps had sent him this down into the depths. Perhaps it's just been some sort of cruel joke, until he realized that this was the point of traps to begin with. The boy still hadn't lost his hopes and didn't even consider that he might have been in deeper trouble than he had initially thought, as he tried to wriggle his stuck left arm out of between himself and a wall. And as he did so, there was a sharp flash of pain, and he let out a little yelp as he felt it coursing through his arms and upper body. He must have broken it somehow. There was no way he'd been able to pull it free without fainting from the pain, and even if he didn't faint, his left arm was still rendered useless. The boy tried twisting his free arm backwards so that he could open his backpack. Calling out one of his Pokémon to search for help seemed like the best idea right about now, and he would have done so if he could have just reached it. He felt a cold steel zipper against his straining fingers for a moment before he had to draw his arm back again, and that was as far as it would even go. Unless he wanted to dislocate his right arm in order to reach into the backpack. Needless to say, he'd rather not take the risk. Instead, he breathed in as deeply as the wall would allow him and yelled out for someone, anyone, to come to his aid. And as he waited, yelled again, and waited some more, he eventually found himself dozing off, his cheek resting uncomfortably against the dirt wall. Now, during this predicament, the panic had not yet settled in his mind, so he slept quite soundly. And our hero wakes up from his light sleep later on by a sound coming from above, steadily increasing in volume. Blinking to try to get the dust out of his eyelashes, he soon recognizes sounds as what had to be footsteps. Light and somewhat haphazard footsteps, and from what he could tell, the approaching person was probably looking around for treasure at his own pace, and the thought struck him that this unassuming person might fall into a pit himself. Taking another deep breath, as deep as he could muster, the boy yelled out again, and he didn't want that person to fall down the pit into him. Obviously, otherwise it'd fall right onto the guy. However, his call of warning was cut short by another fit of hacking coughs, most likely caused by all the dust. And Arceus knew what else. He'd been inhaling, in any case. He had to have been heard by the approaching person, because by the time he finished his coughing fit, the footsteps could no longer be heard. As he listened tentatively, waiting for this person to make himself known, a worry started nagging in his mind. What if he just imagined those footsteps? Could they have been some dream? And judging by the heavy silence of the above tunnel, the worry wouldn't seem like such a stress. The boy called out again just to make sure, but was only met with his own empty echo. He had remained admirably stoic up until then, but this was when he had felt his confidence falter, leaving him with heavy heaving, panic, and constricted breath. The panic settled in, better late than never, no one would suppose, as he could feel his eyes watering up. Surely someone had to have found him there. Someone, would have come down into the underground all the time. People come all the time, and it was only a matter, of time before one of them could have stumbled upon this individual. That had to be the case, right? Deep inside, he knew how it really was, but he was still holding on to some tiny little strand of hope. And he'd heard all the stories, and he'd come prepared, hadn't he? He and his Pokémon with him, he had supplies, tools, all he had needed to survive, but the truth was that the tunnels were sparsely populated at the best of times, and the boy couldn't quite recall having ever run into any other treasure hunter during his own time spent in the tunnels. The only people he had met had been one of 4 men who had wanted to trade spheres with him, and he'd been down here for what must have been hours on end. At first, he'd been a little surprised to see so few people looking for treasure, but surprise had quickly turned into glee. More treasure for him, right? Now the boy felt foolish for ever thinking that way. Now there was nothing he wanted more than for some other treasure hunter to come waltzing by, noticing the young boy trapped in a pit and saving him. And before the panic was able to claim the rest of the body, though, there came another sound from above. Directly above the pit, there was a single light footstep. So it hadn't been a dream. He didn't bother hiding his tears. Under other, less life-threatening circumstances, he probably would have, but now wasn't the time to show how tough he was. All he wanted right now was for this person to rescue him, for him to take them out of this underground so that he could make sure never to return there again, to put all of that behind him. As his head shot up and his eyes slowly got used to the light emanating from the light bulbs in the ceiling, the shadow looked down on him slowly, starting to form a shape. But it wasn't like any shape that he had seen before. Maybe his eyesight was just blurry from all the dirt and dust. I mean, that had to be the case. Because the person up there didn't look like a person at all, rather some sort of unshapely mass. A Pokemon? Just as he felt the disappointment wash over him again, no way a wild Pokemon would listen to his pleas and go get help. The person spoke to him, or at least that's what he supposed it was trying to do, and all he heard was some sort of gurgling sound that slowly faded into the wheeze, which then faded into nothing. Our little hero was bewildered to say the least, but perhaps even more frightened by this thing. Or perhaps it wasn't a thing, perhaps it was another person just like him, who had been hurt and was now begging for help. That seemed more probable. And that reassured the boy a little. That is, until his eyes got fully accustomed to the harsh glare of the light bulbs, and he got to behold what looked to be a man. Couldn't be. Not anymore. Not with all those spotty red mushrooms growing all over his body. The thing, he was now positively sure was indeed a thing, emitted another gravelly moan from somewhere deep within its overgrown body, and that's when the boy managed to break out of his trance and proceed to scream until his throat was sore. But still, he kept screaming, and there was no end. There was an end, though, to the limited air supply down in the pit. He passed out, faintly screaming, his face getting pressed up against the dirt wall once more. But perhaps that was for the best. After all, he didn't have to see the thing climbing down further towards him, on its many light-footed legs. So you can all guess how the story ends, right? Many people get lost down in the underground, and some do actually return, but the question is, upon their return, what condition are they in? It has been said that the ones that manage to get out after being lost are never the same people that they used to be it for better or for worse. Catatonic states, violent bursts of uncontrollable temper, and such have been reported amongst the returned ones throughout the years, and you'll have to ask yourself what kind of things they saw that managed to make them that way. And as for our young hero, he was sadly never one of the returned ones. His family grieved, the sphere traders in the tunnels were questioned, as were the people by the lost tower that had spoken to the boy. But it all came down to nothing in the end. Years had passed and the boy's family eventually moved on. New children were conceived to fill the blank slate the son had left behind, and in time he would eventually be forgotten, merely remembered as one of the countless people that get lost in the underground. Perhaps his confidence became his undoing in the end, and there's no way to know for sure. After all, it's just a bunch of winding tunnels, and nothing more. Why be afraid of tunnels? How silly. So young traveler, if you ever find yourself visiting the underground in the Sinnoh region, keep all this in the mind before you decide to venture down there. Staying above ground and continuing your journey is what would be most advised, but if you still insist, against all better judgment, go underground. This is just a cautionary tale after all. And remember that should you actually get lost, you're never really alone down there. Who knows? Maybe our young hero is still down there somewhere, scuttling lightly on his many legs, waiting for the company of someone who used to be just like him. So if you see a patch of spotty red mushrooms growing somewhere in a dark corner of the tunnels, watch yourself. It might just be him. And he's been alone for a long, long time. And ladies and gentlemen, it seems like we have a creepypasta from the Pokemon universe all centered around in Sinnoh's Underground. Now, I really took interest to this, not just because it was Pokemon, we haven't really done a Pokemon one in a while, but because it was actually focused on one aspect of the actual game that almost was overlooked by a lot of people, I gotta say. Now, for me personally, back in the days of playing Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, I really did spend many, many hours in the Underground. I don't know why, but I always found the gameplay a little more relaxing on that front, digging around for spheres, getting stuff for your underground tunnels, and sometimes when you go to a populated place, you whip it out, and occasionally you get the one or two people that were also in the underground as well. Very rarely. Very, very rarely. I'm sure I'd get a lot more luck if I was in Japan or something, but frankly, we don't get many people in the underground around our parts. Sad to say, I would say. Now, for those of you who have no idea what this really is, basically, again, in Pokemon Diamond and Pearl, once you get an object called the Explorer Kit, you can actually delve yourself into the underground part of Sinnoh and connect yourself to Wi-Fi communications and basically roam around tunnels and, look for items, dig into walls, get plates out and whatnot, and, trade spheres and whatnot for items that you can, customize your secret base with, which has been a feature in the games since Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire. Now, there's nothing much more to that from a gameplay perspective. That's really all it is, the underground tunnels that you can enter at, and frankly, you can spend a lot of time with it. You really, really can. You can actually put spheres into walls and make them level up to a level, I think, which is 99 or 100 or something like that, and basically use that to, sell and whatnot and use it as an actual currency down there. But again, this isn't really about the gameplay aspects of Pokemon Diamond and Pearl. That could be in its own video entirely. What this is talking to is a spooky phenomenon that could occur. Now, this is written in a way where it really writes from within the universe of Pokemon, similar to, say, something like the Vermilion City project or something like that, or, the Drifloon creepypasta that we read, where it was actually written from the perspective of being in the actual game itself, not really playing the game necessarily or, getting any spooky phenomenon, but getting rather nitty-gritty into the story itself and pretending you're in the universe, which I often find to be a better story anyway, simply because I feel like a lot of people, when they get that game barrier in between them, which it is a barrier, they end up almost squandering it or ruining it in its own way. And over here, there's almost no way to do that unless you really don't understand the source material you're talking about. Now, as far as the story goes around, basically what happens is our lovely protagonist delves himself into the underground, even with a lot of forewarning, muddies around a bit, gets some spheres, and unfortunately falls so far into depths that they end up getting screwed over because it seems like there is more to the underground than lets on, and it seems like the underground is home to a life form that frankly is very Gears of War reminiscent to this universe. I don't really know what kind of a crossover I could really use aside from that, but the spookier part is that there are zombies thrown in, and while it is kind of off the way they're thrown in, it seems a little bit hammered in, I gotta let it slide because at the end of the day it was done pretty well. You had an interesting beginning, middle, and an end, where the end, sure, you got interested, you got interested, to see what was going to happen to our protagonist. They were going to get saved, and it turns out they come across this multi-legged being. They used to actually be somewhat human, I guess, at one point, and they unfortunately laid demise to our protagonist, and the cycle unfortunately repeats. People are always interested, and next time you happen to use that Explorer Kit and go down into the depths, it might make you a little spooked to see some mushrooms in a corner. That being said, I don't think there's much more to this other than what's being offered. It's an interesting story, spooky little look on the underground in Pokemon, which is a feature that I don't think I've seen in games after Diamond and Pearl. I think it was just exclusive to that era of Pokemon games. Let me know what you think about the underground. Let me know what you think about the story. And frankly, if you think that a Pokemon might end up doing this, I don't know. If you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Dislike it if you dislike it. This has been another episode of Haunted Gaming. Let me know what you would rate this and what would you change to make it better. This is me, Mudahar, and I am out.